let's take a look at the very first module. One of the things in any business that is very, very important is inventory. Inventory is the stuff you have, okay? It's stuff you have in order to do business. And the idea that stuff is going to be used either to produce the things that you're making, or it is going to be the finished product. So it could be the raw material, or it could be the finished product. It's inventory nonetheless. The thing is with inventory, it is great from your perspective of meeting the consumer need. So someone comes into your store and is looking for a part for a 1963 Chevy Corvette, okay? Curtis, there's one for you. So you're looking for a very unique item for a Chevy Corvette. 1963, wow. That's a pretty unique item. And if it was only, let's assume it was a peculiar part only for that year. Let's assume that you had it in inventory. The customer would walk away super happy. You had the product that the customer came into your store looking for. However, let's look at it from your point of view. You've had that sitting on the shelf for 20 years, 30 years. It's just sitting there gathering dust, waiting for that customer to finally come in and to please that customer. So there's a fundamental trade-off with inventory. If you have it, and lots of it, consumers are very happy because they'll walk into your store and you'll have what they want. On the other hand, if you have lots of inventory, you may not be so happy because you're carrying all this and that's sitting there gathering dust. Your money's tied up in it. It could break. It could fall off the shelf. It could grow legs. It could go moldy. It could rust. Any number of things can happen to it. So what you got to do is when you think of inventory is think about that two sides of it. Should I carry it to keep the customer happy? And if I do carry it, is it costing me too much money? So that's the kind of the trade-off and the real business issue that you got to face with inventory is this magic trade-off between having inventory on the shelf and keeping customers happy. With that said about inventory and the fact that inventory is kind of a, we need to be very careful with it in terms of having too much or too little. The other thing that we have to consider is in here is, should we get it from this person or that person? Or where do we get it at all? So really we can think about inventory in terms of you got the management issue once you have it, but you also got the how can I get it issue. So we're looking at those two basic aspects of it here in these slides is managing it and getting it. Okay. The basic definition of inventory then it includes all business goods and services that are available for sale and the raw materials used to produce these goods. So if you're in a carpentry business, it is all of the wood products that you have stored in your warehouse that is sitting there to be turned into tables. Okay, so it's the raw material. It is also, you've created the tables and they're set in your warehouse waiting to be shipped out to customers. That's inventory as well. So inventory could be raw or it could be finished product. You could also have a third type of inventory, and that's work in progress. Depending on how long your assembly line is, it's the stuff that's on the shop floor that's half produced, okay? You got a half a table. Inventory appears in the current assets. If you recall back in the finance chapter, we looked at the balance sheet and we said, okay, look, there's current assets. Current assets are assets that are readily turned into cash within 1 year. And one of the biggest current assets was inventory. In fact, when we did the ratio analysis, we said, okay, well, we got the basic current ratio, which looks at current assets divided by current liability. And then we say, oh, we can even make it finer if we do the quick ratio or the acid test where we kick out inventory and we just say our current assets minus the inventory over our current liabilities. People hold inventory and companies hold inventory to keep customers happy. Okay, so the primary objective of holding inventory is to ensure that your business can quickly meet customer needs in a timely manner. From a store's point of view, too much inventory is a real problem because it's just money tied up. So we got to be careful with that. And also the other fact is that it can get obsolete. From a business point of view, every business has to make that conscious decision to find a good balance between having too much inventory and not enough inventory. So we'll look at some of the features that can influence this inventory and how much you should carry. Well, let's think about some of the costs first. And the cost is a very big influence on how much inventory you should take. Depends on what you're selling. Some things are more expensive than others. So you got to think, well, what constitutes the cost of inventory? Well, all the expenditures you really put into getting that product in your store or in your storefront really need to be considered as part of inventory costs. So you could think about invoice processing costs, transportation costs, storage costs, import duties, insurance. All of those things add to the cost of inventory. So the more inventory you keep, the higher those costs are going to be and the associated costs of keeping up with the business. And some of them are pretty hidden, like import duties and insurance. How many times do people factor that into the cost of the actual product on the shelf? In terms of sourcing products, where should you get this stuff to? That's another big process new companies have a lot of trouble with. And we don't have to look any farther. There's a current example going on right now in the world. Try finding a 3M particulate respirator 8210 plus N95. Try finding it. And in fact, down in the corner of 3M's website right now, they say 3M is seeing an increased demand for respiratory protection products following the outbreak of the newly identified coronavirus. In response, 3M is increasing respirator production to help meet the demand and working with distributors to help ensure that they have an inventory to meet end user demand. 3M is committed to supporting public health. So 3M is having a lot of trouble keeping up with the demand for these N95 respirators. And I think if you went to Canadian Tire or any store today where you normally would find these things, dust masks, we normally call them, you would have a hard time finding them because a lot of people are really going out and buying them and hoarding them up. There are a number of things that are recommended in business for people seeking suppliers. And the first thing is to first find the potential suppliers. Now, there's lots of resources out there to find potential suppliers for things, and we'll look at a few in a few minutes. So if you had to go out, you got to be able to ask some good questions before you go out. So think about some of these basic questions before you ever go looking, okay? What will the size of the order be? How many will you potentially order? Are you a big order or a small order? Will you carry it in inventory or will you buy it as needed? These things are expensive items. You don't want to have too many in inventory. So you'd probably say, okay, I'll minimize my inventory, but I'll order more. I'll order more often, not order more, but order more often. And then you got to think, well, how much does an order cost? How much does it cost me to order something? You got to kind of weigh out, is it more cost effective to have an inventory or is it more cost effective to order it as I go? How close do your potential suppliers need to be in order to fulfill your requirements? And again, that N95 mask example that's in the news right now is a classic example. 3M is in Minnesota. Minnesota is right across the border from Ontario, Manitoba. I mean, really, in terms of where the market is, it's not very far away from the market. However, it's across the U.S. border, and that has posed some problems. Now, those masks, specifically, some are made in the United States, but most are made in China. So how do we get the product from China here? And I see that a lot of the airlines are now involved in offering up their planes to go fly those masks from Wuhan, which was the first place the coronavirus hit, to Canada and the United States. So we're seeing a lot of product being flown over now. And again, it's a function of how far away is it. To put it on a ship, it would take 6 weeks to get here. Too long. We need to fly it, and it needs to be there within hours. Obviously, that affects the cost of it. We have to ask ourselves, how efficient is the supplier at order processing? My wife ordered a pair of shoes yesterday from the running room, I think it was. This morning, get a knock on the door. Here's the product. Now, that's pretty efficient. So if it was ordered yesterday and arrived here today, that's pretty efficient. Are all processing orders like that? I think if you go out and you check on eBay and you see how long it takes something to come, you're going to find that that varies depending on where the product comes from. If it comes from China, you're probably looking at 6 weeks. If it comes from somewhere in Canada, you might be looking at a week. So these things are very different. Now, if you pay more, you can get it come faster, no doubt about it. So speaking of paying more and these sorts of things, you're also going to want to worry about your shipping options. Certain places are set up for being, I'll call it positive logistics areas. You can get stuff really quickly. If you live in a town that has an airport or you live next to an airport, products can get to you fairly quickly. If you're in northern Labrador, you're not going to have such a luxury, right? It may show up and may not show up. The weather plays a role, flight play a role. You're in a very remote area. Newfoundland is fairly remote. And so, we have had weather problems and these sorts of things here. So that's something that you have to consider is how far away are your suppliers from you and how long does it take the product to get there? Do you have lots of shipping options? What level of support would you expect or need from the supplier? For straightforward products, you might say that's not complicated. I've got a box of tissues here. I mean, really, is that a complicated product? Do you need much supplier support? However, other products might need a lot of support. They could be complicated. They could have installation issues. They could need regular maintenance. How do you do that? And, certain suppliers have really good systems set up for keeping in contact with you. For example, dedicated phone numbers, internet, these sorts of things. Some products in and of themselves come with their own information systems. Your car is a classic example. Your car has a computer built into it, so when you bring it up to your dealer, they just need to plug it in. It used to be plug it in. Now it's all done through Wi-Fi. And basically, they park the car next to the reader, and the information will be downloaded out of the car's computer into their computer. It'll tell you what's wrong with the car, order the parts, and do all these things automatically. So this is something that has really allowed for the level of support from the various car manufacturers to increase to the end consumer. And finally, we have to ask ourselves what payment terms are offered. And that's a very important one for most small businesses because you as a business owner want the best possible terms possible. You don't want to have to pay for it right off the bat. You'd like to pay 30 days time, 60 days time. That helps. It's effectively loaning you money if you don't have to pay right away. And that's great for a business, particularly if the revenue isn't going to come in from those products immediately. We also have to think about sourcing it and where should you source it. You talk about how close is it. There's a lot of advantages to doing things different ways. The problem is there's an equal number of disadvantages to doing things in certain ways. Now, this slide here is meant to give you some of the concerns as much as anything. There's to look at and say, I can buy a product cheap from China or cheap from Asia or cheap from somewhere else. That's an obvious advantage. But what are some of the downsides? Well, domestic sourcing products, buying stuff locally, within Canada is what I mean by locally here. We can pretty well guarantee that these are going to meet the health and safety and labor standards. If it's built in Canada, it has to have some sort of the labor laws in Canada and the product laws in Canada are pretty stringent, and we're pretty good with them, as they are in the United States. And, if it comes from North America, we can pretty well say, that the product has been made reasonably well, reasonably safe. So that's a good. That may not be the case for something that's imported from abroad. We don't know what the labor standards are. We may not know what the health standards are of the product, and it may not meet. There was a piece on Marketplace a little while ago about this issue of makeup, and makeup in Canada is made, and people put it on their skin. But a lot of makeup from different parts of the world have products in it that you wouldn't want anywhere near you. So you have to be careful with that. Domestic products, easy communication, pick up the phone. They usually speak French or English, mostly English, so it's pretty good. It has anything that's made in Canada has the flag attached to it. It's much easier to sell a local product that's made here in Canada. Easy to verify the manufacturer reputation. Other people are dealing with them. It's well known, that it's a known thing. There's no import duties. when I order something off eBay, I always got to worry about that. If you're ordering it from the States or some other place, there could be import duties which drive up the effective cost of the product to you. Quicker shipping time, intellectual property rights. Now that's great for service providers in particular. If what we mean by intellectual property is patents and copyright and these sorts of things. If you're let's assume your business is making something that requires a thought or a certain degree of skill, or it has some intrinsic value that's unique to you. Computer code comes to mind, but if you're machining products and there's a special way that the product is made or a special design, the secret recipe, we'll call it. In Canada and the United States, there's good laws to protect it. In certain parts of the world, there's no such thing. Knockoffs are pretty common, for example, coming out of Asia. And the good thing with Canadian or reasonably North American manufacturers is that you're pretty well assured to get money, which is a big thing. You're going to get your payment. If they're paying you or if you send them money, it's not going to get lost. So there's a good solid banking system here with a good set of rules around it. However, the downside with domestic stuff is that it's expensive. You're going to pay for all those things, because there's minimum wage laws, labor laws, all of these sorts of things usually cost money. And the volume just isn't there you'd have from a larger manufacturer. And certainly product choice is not going to be as great. We look at international sourcing. What's great about that? Well, lower manufacturing costs, particularly if labor is cheaper. Higher number of manufacturers to choose from, lots of choice. The internet's made it so easy. So, relatively, it's no harder to order from China than it is from Toronto, if you look at the internet. However, we have to think about some of the disadvantages, potential lower perceived quality from the customers, lower manufacturing and labor standards, potential reduction in intellectual property protection, cultural and language barriers, costly to verify the manufacturer. So you got to go look at a site visit. Flying over to China may not be the cheapest thing that you want to do. Longer shipping time, cultural differences in business practices could be different. Simple things like just, oh no, we always we deal with a Chinese manufacturer, and I thought we had a deal. We didn't really have a deal. And you just didn't understand the cultural business practices of that organization, and as a result, you misunderstood what they meant. Importation costs, payment security, all these sorts of things come in. So, in terms of sourcing, you got to consider that. The second major thing that we need to do in terms of going out and looking for product sourcing is contact potential suppliers. So you're going to narrow down a list. In the first step, we looked at, well, where are the suppliers coming from? In the second step, you're really asking yourself, well, now which ones am I going to call? Well, with that bunch of information I just gave you there in that slide past, you're going to be able to narrow down the potential suppliers. No, I'm not going to deal with someone in Taiwan. No, I'm not going to deal with someone in the United States, or not going to deal with. So you've narrowed it down. So you know that instead of having a choice of 100, now you've narrowed it down to a select group of 5. So you got to be able to ask the right questions, and that's the trick. That's the trick thing with these potential suppliers. Do your homework before you go and ask them. So the questions to ask, as I say, are related right here. How big an order what's the minimum size order they'll accept? What are the shipping costs? What are the import costs? What kind of payment terms? These are the things you really need to consider. One of the things that a lot of people don't think about, and they should, is before you ever buy anything from anybody, is ask for some samples. And in today's world, a lot of manufacturers will be willing to provide product samples. So here I've got a little graphic of a industrial rubber sample kit. So this is the types of products that you're selling, no different than what you'd find in the store. So if you're making car seats or if you're making leatherette, here are the various types that they have, and you can get the sample and feel it, touch it, get a sense if it works or doesn't work for you. A lot of suppliers, if you're wanting to buy from them, they want to sell to you. So it's not difficult to get samples from these suppliers. So before you place an order, really get those samples, try them, see which see which is best, and then make decisions based on that. So it's a useful thing to do, is look for some samples. The next thing is really not overly complicated either. And don't order a big order on the first go. Okay, make the first order relatively small. So once you feel you've got it down to a few potential suppliers, go make a small order, a relatively small order. And from that, you're going to be able to say, should I not, or should I continue to deal with them? That first order is going to really give you a sense for how much it actually costs, how long it takes to get it, how fast they are at filling orders, what kind of pricing system they got in terms of how much time will they give you to pay for, how much time will it take to get it, all these sorts of things. So you get a good sense on some of these questions that you asked on the very first stage. You get a good sense on those without too much risk. Finally, once you've settled to say, yeah, that's a good person to deal with or a good company to deal with, build that relationship. And it all goes back to relationship selling that we talked about in the previous module. And that is, if you find a supplier that's good, make sure you work in order to ensure that that continues to be a good relationship. So build a relationship, better understand their needs, they'll better understand your needs, and it will certainly pay dividends into the future. It's one thing to say, okay, we're kind of, to go through those 4 or 5 steps to say, okay, here's what I should do. Where do you find suppliers? Where do you find suppliers for paints, seeds, gardening supplies? Where do I find those suppliers? Well, the internet is probably the best place that is used right now in terms of being able to do very quick and dirty review of where you can get stuff. The internet is the go-to place right now. So all supply companies who are worth their salt are on the web. They have websites, and all you need to be able to do is find those websites. So in order to find websites, you should have a good idea how to use search engines such as Google, okay? So, the problem with Google is if you don't know how to do a really good search, you're not going to get a good search. It's just going to be everything, a mass of things. So what you need to be able to do is know these simple little tricks when you're searching for something, okay? If you're looking for something specific, put the specific words in the search menu. So let's assume you're looking for a DeWalt cordless drill, okay? Now, we know DeWalt is the manufacturer, and the product you're looking for is a drill, and specifically, it's a cordless drill. So you got to drill it down. It's DeWalt, it's a drill, and it's a cordless drill. So those 3 words are absolutely critical in the search. Now, if I want to search for, in this case, a DeWalt cordless drill, you notice all of the search things that come up is related to DeWalt drills, specifically cordless ones. And here I have, you can see all of the images come up and the various pricing and all of that. So, that allows you to do a much better search. Those keywords are absolutely critical in order to go out and do a good search. So make sure you put in all the keywords, okay? Another thing I'd like to show you is sources of supplier information. It used to be years ago we had, libraries that would have books in them that would have lists of all the suppliers. Well, these books are all online now. And in fact, they're set up as websites in and of themselves. So here are 3 of the big ones. Worldwide Brands is a wholesale directory service that connects you to millions of products and thousands of suppliers, okay? Wholesale 2B is a drop ship service that has the features for dealing with inventory and exporting products. So they allow you to go in and actually buy products from manufacturers. And ThomasNet is another one. It is really the granddaddy of industrial directories, established over 100 years ago. It used to be in a booklet. Now it's all online. I've indicated in here all of these. You go to the website. I'll just pick Worldwide Brands. So Worldwide Brands will, they allow you to go and search for all kinds of things. Now, one of the things that you're going to see is that you'd log in. So you're going to have to get some credentials in this. It's not overly complicated to do that, but it's you can be a member, you can pay to be a member, you can be a supplier, different bits and pieces. Again, you can look at the various types of things they offer. Just to tell you what a drop shipper is, a drop shipper is just a delivery company that basically delivers products to your door. So their job is to go out, you tell them, I'd like you to buy me or find me DeWalt cordless drills. They go out, find DeWalt cordless drills, and bring them to you. For you as an individual, you might want to think about finding the names and places, putting faces to names of people who actually do the stuff that you want to have done, okay? Maybe you're looking for a particular type person with a particular type skill to employ, to hire, a company to look at. LinkedIn is a really good spot for that. Another good source of supply information, and this is a reputable source from the government of Canada. Well, it's actually part of the North American Free Trade Agreement, so it's Canada, US, and Mexico, to be truthful. And that is Statistics Canada offer this something called the North American Industrial Classification System. And what it does is it allows you to search for industries, manufacturers, suppliers, whatever you want to call them. It allows you to go and search for various industries doing certain things. A traditional type of approach, and again, one that we it's not as technical and as fancy-dancy as the internet, but it's probably still the number one, and it is trade shows. Trade shows have really been on the go for years. They allow people to meet one another face-to-face. One of the things that you need to make sure that you have when you go to a trade show is a business card, okay? The business card is the key tool to maintain these relationships. Now, LinkedIn is like, it allows you to do that because you can meet up with people and hook them up as friends, no different than on Facebook. But make sure that if you go out to a trade show, you have a business card. So get some business cards made. They're relatively cheap to have made, and it pays dividends in terms of going to trade shows and getting something out of them. Another type of issue that we need to consider yourself with regards to suppliers is, okay, should you focus on one supplier or should you have multiple suppliers? And again, it's one of those questions that most businesses have to ask. And what you're going to do is you're going to find that one supplier is going to do a really good job for you, and that'll be your main source of supply. The problem with your main source of supply, if that main source of supply disappeared tomorrow, you'd be out of luck. So what you need to do is to be very careful in terms of dealing with one. Probably at the start of your business, you want to deal with multiples, okay? And multiples allow you to get better prices, better security of supply, and to some degree allow for you to maintain a higher quality control, because you can say, well, if one's not as good as the other, you can buy more of the better quality one. It's always good to have a backup source of supplies. So in summary then, we got lots of different types of inventory out there that you can consider yourself as having. You know, you talk about raw material, work in progress, finished goods. It helps ensure that the customer is happy. It helps ensure you got a supply. As a hedge against price increases. And variations in demand, and allows you to meet variations in demand. You know, if you had a big supply of N95 dust masks, for example, demand goes up, you got them. It safeguards against price changes, smooths out any variations. It takes advantage of discounts, quantity discounts. It cuts transportation costs. If you get a lot, you only got to transport it once. It's probably just cheap to transport many as it is few. And you develop happy customers. So that's inventories. They're really good for that. But inventories have a cost. You got to weigh out the cost of all those benefits against making sure you got a good supply. And to show this way out, here's a little graphic that kind of shows this. If you look at your costs on one side and you look at your order size on the bottom, the red line is your storage costs, okay? So let's assume that you don't have any storage whatsoever, but you order everything in. So no storage costs if you order everything in and you don't have any inventory. As you grow, as it goes up, as the line goes up, let's assume you have greater inventory on the far right, your holding costs are going to be higher. Okay, so that's where that red line comes from. The more you store, the higher your holding costs. The less you store, the lower your holding cost. The blue line is the exact opposite. It says, okay, look, it's your transportation costs. If you transport a lot, you're going to have high transportation costs. If you don't transport a lot, you're going to have low transportation costs. So holding costs and transportation costs are exactly opposite one another. You'll know it creates the X, right? If you transport more, you don't have to store as much. If you store more, you don't have to transport as much. What you got to do is try to find that sweet spot. And that green line represents the sweet spot, which is your total cost at its lowest possible point. So getting that sweet spot really depends on the type of products you're selling. And you really want to think about it from this perspective, depending on the individual products that you have. What is the best value that you can have in terms of maintaining a good solid inventory, but maintaining a low cost at the same time? Or to think about the inventory too, you got to think about, well, what happens when it's on the shelf? And we got to think about, well, record keeping. We got to make sure we have good record keeping if we got inventory. We don't want parts disappearing, and you want to know you have the parts. So a good database of what's on the shelf is important. Otherwise, all that inventory is not valuable. Someone comes in, looks for a part for a 63 Chevy. You're going to say, oh, I don't know. I got to go look. Well, you could be looking for hours. If you got it in the computer system, you can look for 2 seconds. Correct information on labels and tags is important. Stock room. You got to have a good, well-organized stock room. And that comes at a cost because you got to have stock people. Storage units. You got to have proper storage units that hold a fixed or standard amount. It's always good to have shelves that when you fill up, you know exactly how much is on the shelf because it fits the exact size number of products. Periodically reviewing your inventory, doing a count of your inventory is important. Usually companies do it once a year, but you need to do it more if you got high value inventory because you don't want it walking away on you. Good people in the warehouse and stock room is important, and technology. I mentioned this barcoding and RFID tags. Barcoding is pretty common. It's been around since the 70s. It's the little stripes that you see on a product that you scan. A new type of thing is RFID. If you got a new car and you walk up to the car and the door automatically opens, that works on RFID. It just allows you to put a scanner next to it. It'll tell you how much is there or how many pieces are there, these sorts of things. The product actually talks back to the computer. We have to maintain a safety stock too, and I guess this past few weeks have recognized the need for a safety stock, which is a buffer of an amount of product that you have in storage to tie you over in the case of an emergency. In Newfoundland, for example, McDonald's, everywhere else in North America, McDonald's insists that they have 2 weeks of safety stock in their stores. In Newfoundland, it's 3 weeks. And the reason is that we're an island. So they want to encourage a greater safety stock. Different stores will have different amounts. Again, depends on what you're selling.